Welcome to Season 4 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today we're going to talk about the role of change agents in digital transformation. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Adam Chen, Chief Marketing Officer at Amenity Collective. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Really excited to speak with you this evening.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Definitely an important topic and one that I know is top of mind to both of us as well as many others. So looking forward to diving in here. But why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself as well as your role at Amenity Collective.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the Amenity Collective. We are a collection of companies that manage different amenity spaces for a lot of different types of properties, from multifamily properties, condos, HOAs, all the way up to massive country clubs, pools, gyms, and the like. It's a really exciting time to be in communications and marketing and be able to really drive some change within our own organization. Over the years, I've had a number of different roles, from core IT all the way through, creative and communications, as you might find in an agency. But I've always kind of found myself at that intersection of communications, technology, and really driving change in organizations.
Great. Yeah, and you and I met as a client and agency first started working together there, and I've had the fortune of working with you in several different capacities. So yeah, it's been great to see a lot of different challenges being solved. So looking forward to talking and certainly touching on some of those things. So let's start by talking about digital transformation or just change management or change initiatives in general. Often they're called digital transformations or something similar. And, there's a lot of statistics out there, depending on which article you read or which stats you see. As many as 70% of digital transformations fail to reach their intended goals and, so many similar things like that. From your perspective and experience and all of that, why is this so difficult? Why are change initiatives so difficult?
It's a good question. And I'm happy to say that I think I have a little bit higher batting average than the 30% on that stat. But certainly, I've had my own, I'll call them failures. I know that's kind of a heavy word sometimes, but, in the true tech form, fail fast and learn from it. And, I think that's what's gotten me here today. But I think there's really two sides, to go back to your question, two components that organizations need to think about before they even embark on a change initiative. And it goes by many names. Obviously, it's semantics. Digital transformation is very trendy, right? But really, change is inevitable in the world today. And if you're not keeping up with change, businesses, you're going to lose your competitive advantage. So I think there's two sides. So it's the personnel that you're ultimately charging with the accountability and responsibility to drive that change within an organization. And then it's also, is the environment ripe to accept that change? Is your organization ready? And are all the employees that you might have in your organization from top to bottom, aligned and bought in to why you're driving this change? And I think that why is really important.
I was just gonna ask on that, and I want to get to the personnel component, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But yeah, why don't we start with the components? What is your thinking on that?
Yeah, so on the environmental side, I guess they talk about it with organizations. It really comes down to culture, I think, and I think a good barometer to see if your organization has the right culture to accept change is, are people free to communicate? Are people willing to critique and offer constructive feedback within your organization, both up the hierarchy and also down the hierarchy? And are people willing to listen to that change and then drive it? But I think I like to use an analogy when I'm talking about kind of the environmental factors within an organization, and it's kind of I equate it to a recipe, a cake recipe maybe, right? And you need to have all the right ingredients to make sure that your cake rises, to make sure that that cake tastes good at the end. And sometimes the ingredients of that cake you might not think are important, right? But, just like in a cake recipe, the addition of salt, it's not just sugar, but it's also salt that brings out additional flavor. And it's some of those, unexpected ingredients that I think are often overlooked within organizations.
Yeah. And how does an organization identify those things? And, what are some of the methods and processes that can be used? Because to your point, there's a lot that goes into, when we're talking about some of these initiatives taking, 18, 24 plus months, as well as just, as you said earlier, change never really stops either. So change is continuous. So, how do you go about identifying some of those ingredients that need to be there in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with strong leadership. Ultimately, I mentioned it before, but you need to understand the why, and there needs to be a real why. Oftentimes I think change initiatives need to be driven by a catalyst. They're really in response to something else. Maybe there is a merger or an acquisition, right? And you need to bring two cultures together. Maybe there's a brand new market that a company is trying to explore and penetrate, right? That necessitates kind of some kind of change initiative, whether that's cultural, whether that's a sales approach, that's brand, it can really, be in any element, any division within your business. But I think it all starts at the top. First and foremost, you need to have a vision, and that vision needs to be clear, concise, is able to be communicated by all of leadership. Change initiatives are really organizationally driven, not driven by necessarily any individual person. It really takes an army. So I think it starts with the CEO. The CEO needs to understand what it takes, right? And I think what I mean when I say what it takes is, you just mentioned, it could take 18 months, it could take 24 months. Projects and organizations like to have definitive finite timelines. Right. CEOs and CFOs like to have clear understanding of costs and expectations and resource, constraints and all the like, but I think even the most practiced organizations that undertake change initiatives still underestimate what it really takes. Maybe oftentimes in my experience, I've found that the training component, right, the communication component, and getting actual users of some of the, change systems in the example of maybe a new technology system, getting them to understand why they're doing it. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it starts. But I think the other side of the organization is kind of the boots on the ground, the doers, right? You can have all the great planning in the world, but that planning and alignment needs to take into account the people that are actually going to be affected most by those change initiatives. So there needs to be a genuineness of why they're doing it. So the leadership needs to be kind of keyed in to what those pain points are, on the ground, on the front lines, client-facing folks, whatever that change is. So there already needs to be healthy communication up and down the hierarchy, as I mentioned before, so that inevitably when you run into roadblocks, stumbling blocks, maybe you need to pivot, change your approach, right? Leadership is ready to hear that. There's a process in which that you can get that feedback and then act on it quickly. And I think through that process, it just builds a stronger organization. If you can, you mentioned the stat 70 and 30, right? If you're part of that 30% that can effectively drive a good change initiative, it actually strengthens the culture within your company. Yeah. So I guess to summarize, what it takes is it takes alignment across the entire organization. And everyone needs to know their role in driving that change, and then what success looks like. And that has to start with a clear and concise vision.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that. And there's a lot of talk about leadership needing to be aligned, and to completely agree with that. When we were chatting before starting this interview, just kind of planning for the show, you also mentioned, I think, a really good concept of, for those that are not the CEO and yet that are very much bought into the leadership's vision and very much want the change to occur, those, call them change agents, can be really, really effective within the organization. And, so I thought that was a really interesting concept that you brought up. Do you mind just kind of, what does that term and role change agent mean to you? And what is their role in a change initiative?
Yeah. In my mind, I like the word, well, obviously change agent. Let's break that down a little bit. I love the word change. I mean, that is very clear and direct of kind of what your responsibility is. You have to affect change. And I think that's what drives some intrinsic satisfaction, I think, in people is that they can make an impact, right? And that's what change really means, is you can make an impact, a positive impact in an organization. Agent, I think, is also an interesting word there, because you have to have agency over your charter, your course, right, in this company and your role. But maybe if I use a different word to describe what a change agent is, it's really a leader. And it's a leader in the truest sense that a leader doesn't necessarily need to lead by authority, right? And I think sometimes authoritative leaders, and not necessarily just an authoritative approach, but those that lead due to where they sit in a corporate hierarchy, right? It's almost like a cop out, an excuse, right? It's really a change agent is a leader through influence, right? There's somebody that's well respected within an organization, whether that's their ability to bring people together, whether that's their deep expertise in a particular topic, right? So I think it's really important to, I think it's not just the change initiative itself and the vision we were talking about before, but it's making sure that you're giving the responsibility to the right person in your organization. Maybe that person exists in your organization already. Maybe you need to go outside, right? I mean, there's obviously there's a whole industry of consultants, right? Business consultants out there that organizations have to bring in from the outside. So I think, in that process of identification, you first need to really look internally about what attributes does this person need to embody, and be real honest with yourself, about if that person actually exists in your organization or not, because it is a unique trait, I think, that is embodied by some of these folks that are successfully change agents. And what you don't want to do, I think, in that identification process is, rely on politics 100%, because you're just going to set yourself up for failure. And I think that's the folly that many organizations take, whether it's on, the assignment of the change agent and who you're, building a project team with, or, the other components on communication and the right environment and all those things. Before you even kick something off, you got to make sure all of those ingredients are in place, right? Otherwise, you're just capping your upside. And I don't think any CFO or CEO wants to commit valuable resources to something that is doomed to fail.
Right. Definitely. And, I think to follow on the concept of the change agent, I mean, another, as we were talking earlier, another concept kind of came out where, on the outside of a company, they call them entrepreneurs because they're starting brand new businesses and things like that. When you're inside a company, whether it's large or a smaller company, the concept of being an intrapreneur and really starting, whether it's starting new business lines or just starting new ideas and changes within, it can become a very powerful thing. And I think it's tied up really with that change agent concept. What does it look like to be an entrepreneur, and how does this help both the company as well as the individual?
Yeah, I love that, and it really, I think, speaks to our relationship a little bit. Like, you're a successful entrepreneur, you've had successful exits. And I've always kind of looked up to you in that regard, Greg. And, I've taken a very different approach, I think, in my career. While I have obviously been involved in a couple different startups, certainly not to the success you have, I have primarily been client side. I have primarily worked within organizations. But you and I both, I think, share some of those intrinsic traits that an entrepreneur and intrapreneur must embody. Yeah. So, it's fascinating. And, I want to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about like the differences of those approaches. And, I think some of it comes down to kind of risk tolerance in some ways, right? And I think people that gravitate towards entrepreneurialism, and start their own thing, obviously are very risk tolerant, right? You're willing to kind of put your neck out there, put some skin in the game, right? And that could obviously be a boon. It really could come back to bite you if you're not ready. And an intrapreneur is interesting because you're not having to take on potentially that financial risk. You're not having to put your own livelihood potentially, out on the line. So what you're doing is, you're just using other people's money, other people's resources, right? Mm-hmm. So the motivation, I think, on an entrepreneur is obviously you want to make a ton of money, or you want to make some significant impact on the world with your investments, and dare I say, I've worked in some government contracting environments as well as private sector or whatnot, but more often than not, I find a lot of people that just look to kind of be content, for lack of a better word. Yeah. They go to these organizations because of the safety, right? Because they can rely on that paycheck. They can clock in at 9 a.m., clock out at 5, and forget about everything, right? As an entrepreneur, you don't have that luxury, right? You're
Right.
working 24 hours a day. Um, so I think it's even harder to identify an entrepreneur is kind of what I'm getting at, because the people that naturally gravitate towards working in, maybe a pre-existing companies, right, are maybe more inclined to look for that safety. So it makes it even more difficult to identify that change agent with the organization, and why it might actually be more beneficial to look outside, right, to consultants who have formed a business around being a change agent in some sorts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that identification and being able, so I think if you have an entrepreneur in your organization, hold on to them. They're your rock stars, right? They're the people, right, that have that kind of multiplication factor, right? Like, I think any organization, you have pluses, minuses, multipliers, and dividers, right? You've got people that add, right, value to the company. You got people that subtract, and maybe they're not always a subtractor. I think everyone, if you're a brand new employee at a company, you're going to be a subtractor. It's going to take you a little while to, learn the industry, learn the company's processes, the jargon, whatever it is. There's a learning curve.
Yeah.
But hopefully everyone becomes an addition, right? But then you also have on the other side dividers, right? They're the toxic people. They're the ones you want to get out of the organization. But change agents, they're the multipliers. They're the ones that lift up, right, a team, that impact others, that align people. And it's those types of people in your organization that you might want to tap to potentially be this change agent.
Well, yeah, and I think that also gets back to culture too, because the company culture needs to support those, maybe not the dividers so much, but it needs to support everybody, because you can't, if you have a company full of entrepreneurs, there's going to be a million great ideas, but nothing will ever get done because people are too busy coming up with new ideas. Like, you need the doers too. And yet, if you only have doers, then you've just got a bunch of people that are, in some cases just collecting a paycheck and clocking in, clocking out. And none are necessarily innovating. They may be supportive, but they're not innovating. And so I think that does really come down to, leaders being able to lead a diverse group of people with a diverse set of goals. And also, those entrepreneurs or change agents kind of also knowing when it's appropriate to think big and when it's appropriate to, to follow through on those ideas. And I would say maybe that is a strength of entrepreneurs that are successful, is they may be able to balance that even a little bit more than entrepreneurs that may be off on their next venture before the first one is even, fully successful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I participated in so many design thinking exercises in my career, and I've always loved just the general idea of like divergent thinking and then convergent thinking, and bringing people back together. And it takes a very unique person, I think, to be able to facilitate an effective, design thinking exercise. And that's kind of what in a kind of a loose way, what we're talking about. That person needs to be able to innovate, to be able to think big picture, outside of the box. Get it all on a board somewhere or something like that. But then you need to be disciplined enough in a resource constrained environment to really hone in on what's going to provide that value, right? And I think in a lot of organizations, for better or worse, especially publicly traded companies, you're really looking at these short time horizons. You have to produce quarterly results, and that sometimes handicaps your ability to really think long term. Some of those, especially strategies where you might have to take a little bit of a dip to kind of reinvent, innovate, and then come out the other side with something transformational. If you're, sometimes you're just doing these small incremental improvements, you're obviously moving forward, but it's not necessarily going to be transformational. So I think that's some of the vision setting, right? That I think needs to be done at the outset of these initiatives, is really understand what success looks like and what you're really trying to achieve. And sometimes that change can be drastic, and sometimes it's incremental, but making sure that everyone understands that, everyone that plays a role in the project understands that, I think is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, that idea of, I feel like there's a growing gap, the companies that are focused on short term. I mean, most companies have to be focused on some kind of short-term result, for the reasons you already said, for very practical reasons. But I think there are many companies, the category leaders, that have kind of gotten over that hump somehow of, okay, a focus on customer experience, employee experience, all of the above can actually translate to positive business outcomes. I feel like there's a growing gap of those that haven't quite gotten there yet. It's getting harder and harder to catch up with those that already kind of passed that. They kind of got past that tipping point, and it seems like a growing challenge, because how do you those leaders keep innovating and keep putting customers and employees first in their business strategy, because they've proven that when they do that, they make more money. Those that have yet to do that, like I said, it seems like there's a possibility they could keep falling behind, not necessarily getting ahead. So it's kind of an upward battle. Would you agree?
100%. I cut my teeth, developing websites, back in the day, and I remember learning table-based layouts, right? And then, CSS came around, right? And then obviously Flash was a big thing, and then, now we're heavy, JavaScript to kind of create some, interactive experiences and things like that. So it's constantly evolving, but what's happening is the complexity is growing more and more. So I couldn't imagine today, in 2022, trying to become a web developer, right? Like I did, years ago, right? I mean, just the amount of options out there and languages and approaches and things like that, is just growing. And I think that's why you see, in web development example, the advent of things and the success of things like Squarespace, right? Like it gives this complexity and simplifies it to the ability for the lay people to kind of stand up a website when that didn't exist before. So that gulf is absolutely, growing between those that can get by with just like a Squarespace site, or those large organizations that need some very customized, really web application as a website.
Yeah.
I know that's some of the stuff that we even worked on together, a couple companies ago.
Right.
But yeah, the complexity, the learning curve, and the gulf is definitely growing. And the creators, because they have to continuously learn in this industry and technology and communications, there's new tools, right? There's that lovely chart of marketing technology tools
right.
Over the years that it's proliferated. It's like 7,000 plus different technologies, and they all overlap. So how the heck can a layperson or someone just getting introduced to marketing be able to navigate those waters? That's crazy. They don't even know where to start to even select a partner or a tool to use.
Yeah,
it's not just the creation, but it's just like the options that are out there. It's almost like choice paralysis, I think, for a lot of organizations. And organizations nowadays can't get away without being a data company first, right? That's the adage right now, is like every company is a technology company nowadays. So CEOs and CFOs can no longer just get by without a deeper understanding, I guess, of what's really driving their business, right? And that's what's gonna kind of keep this going and evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last question before we wrap up. Just kind of thinking about everything we talked about here. It was a lot of stuff and big stuff happening and big initiatives. But for those that are let's to paint a scenario here. For those that are those organizations that they're in some kind of change initiative and feeling a bit stuck. What would, one piece of advice you would have for them be?
Put hubris aside. I think, a lot of organizations are incredibly successful, right? You've built it maybe from the ground up, right? But bringing on a little bit of humbleness and saying, is the next change initiative really something I can accomplish 100% in-house, right? Because of the complexity of the world, is growing, you really be honest with your business. Focus on what you do and what you do well in your core business, and all of these other things that are on the peripheries of what you do that support what you do. There are other companies that is their core. So I think it's really, as the world progresses, it's less of the build in-house, right? It's more of the buy, but partner with other experts, right? Because to help navigate that environment, to help understand and get the right skill sets, especially with the talent shortage and technology that we've been facing even before the pandemic hit. Making sure that you can get those experts is the most important thing. And spending a little bit of money to partner with some of these other companies, firms, people, consultants that you can bring in is worth the weight in gold, because a false start, if you're a part of that 70% that you mentioned at the outset of failed digital initiatives, it's going to cost you way more to your bottom line to try to redo a change initiative than to just spend what it costs to be successful the first time.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, Adam, thanks so much for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of updating, my personal website. I'm looking for more opportunities, obviously, to get out there, speak to folks and see what ways I can continue to be a multiplier myself. So the website is adamchen.com, and in short order, you'll see some updates.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Adam Chen, Chief Marketing Officer at Amenity Collective, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.